This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power. If you haven't heard the previous chapters, you'll find the link to the playlist in the description below. Book 1, Shattered. Chapter 26. The storm clouds roll in. We'd nearly reached the edge of Ambius's domain, where the trees ended and the rolling grasslands stretched before us by the next afternoon. The morning had been uneventful, but lively, with Peta leading us in marching songs with her clear contralto voice. I'd been dreaming more and more, mostly about little things like Christmas morning when I was 6, or my parents tickling me. As sweet as the memories were, I knew it was a form of torture. I hadn't had a family for almost 20 years, and it was easier when I couldn't remember them at all. Once they had faces and idiosyncrasies, though, I was forced to grieve them. A lot of my days of traveling were spent quietly thinking. Glenn and Boreas had much to talk about, owing to a long and exciting history together. Peta and Marlowe were wrapped up in each other, as it should be, as we had been, at first. We were in that place after infatuation. It was still love, still strong and intense, but it wasn't the have to have my hands on you constantly time anymore. We'd grown used to each other and were comfortable, far too anxious with the future to be honeymooners any longer. Reality had intruded. Aura tagged along with either cluster, breaking off like a rogue moon to orbit whoever had the best tales to tell. I liked her, but we didn't have much in common. She didn't know how to speak to me, and I felt the same way about her. It was nice having all this time to myself. I had a chance to sort through the terrible memories that had slapped me in the brain one after another. My mind had been swept and tidy when I came here, almost completely empty. Now I had the opposite problem. My mind felt like a hoarder's den. Memories were shoved haphazardly into unlabeled files and stacked in unsteady piles around the place. To top it all off, I was afflicted with something that caused my thoughts to muddle. I tried to use my time well. Glenn allowed me my space. He was keeping his distance, allowing me time to think, but I'd been thinking for too long. I knew I had less than 3 more moon cycles to go through before the final day. What that final day would look like, I didn't know. No one had really spoken much about the final parts of the quest. At least I'd done what they needed me to do so far. I'd accomplished quite a bit, I thought. Laughter floated back to me on the wind. My friends were having fun. What a joy it was to have warriors to travel with. They didn't whine about being filthy or tired or hungry, or anything I'd expect a soft person like me to do. It was a rule of mine not to complain. I hadn't moaned about being a prisoner in a cult, and I wasn't moaning now. That being the case, it was always nice to find like-minded people to be around. I smiled, thankful for them. Somehow, I'd adapted quite nicely to the nomadic lifestyle. I felt sure it had a lot to do with Candlewick. I couldn't imagine life without her constant help. The trees were growing thinner. We must be nearing the edge of the forest. We'd avoided going through Glenn's village to keep prying eyes at a minimum. We traveled as quickly as possible, and my heart began to beat double time, knowing Ambius's house was within reach. I moved faster, jogging up to walk beside Glenn. Peta began singing her marching songs again. My head was beginning to pound. When we crossed beyond the boundary of trees, Nanu was there waiting, twitching his tail and purring. "Well met, Alana," he said, bowing slightly. "Nanu!" I yelled, running to him and picking him up, smothering him with kisses even as a spike of pain ran through me from temple to temple. He squirmed and slid out of my grasp, landing on all fours. "My lady, control yourself." Everyone burst out in laughter. "I'm sorry, Nanu. I'm just so happy to see you." I patted his head in apology. "Ambius bids you make haste. There is a gathering." "A gathering?" Glenn asked, petting Nanu's back. "The Watchers, they are here." "Rock is here?" Peta asked excitedly. "Of course, they are all here," he said, and turned to lead us into the old wizard's hut. I took the crook of Glenn's arm and walked with him through the tall grass. It felt like a springtime stroll in the park, except for the pounding of my head. The first part of my quest was nearly done. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, flowers were peeking up from their winter naps. I took a deep breath of the cool air and let it back out in a sigh, the headache tinging the glory with pain. A sudden ominous feeling overtook me, making my knees buckle, and I stumbled, falling heavily on my hands and knees in the soft grass. Glenn bent down to see what was wrong. "Fairies!" Peta cried, her hands suddenly filled with balls of flame. I got to my feet, ready for action despite the agony. Glenn had an arrow strung on his bow before I could blink. He sent one flying into the center of a fairy shadow. It burst into flame, the poisonous living light from the royal exploding in vibrant beams where it struck. Out of the woods behind the dying fairy, hundreds of them rushed upon us. Glenn kept felling one after another, but there were too many, and they were moving fast. Marlowe stepped in front of Peta and became a wall of water, thicker in the center than the edges like a spectacle lens. She flashed into a being of pure fire and light, using Marlowe to focus the beam of her brightness. He aimed the point at the oncoming fairies and swept through their ranks like a laser. The effect on the attacking hordes being much like a fireworks show, but up close and at ground level. I stood next to Boreas and shot flames from my hands, which he swept up into small tornadoes and sent spinning into the enemy ranks. Nenu sat behind us, licking himself as if we'd just stopped for a small rest. Aura was most surprising. She became wind and swept through the fallen fairies, collecting the flame-blessed arrows and returning them to Glenn. When she took form again, her face was set in determination. There was no hint of fear in her eyes. Must be nice, I thought. I was shaking, sending fire into the front lines. Everyone but Nanu was working hard. I was coated in a sheen of sweat. The foul creatures were rising up from the hill like fire ants. They poured over the grass, making the blades of green go the lifeless brown of death. How many dwarves had fallen to the warlord? There were too many to deal with in any case. They were gaining ground, even with the fast work of Glenn, the elementals, and me. We were getting tired. "Gather around me," I yelled, and stepped in front of everyone, protecting them. They did as I said, drawing in close to me, no longer fighting. I fell to my knees, facing the fairies, and summoned all the power within me. I thought of what they'd done to Glenn, how they'd tortured him to get to me. It was enough. My center, somewhere under my sternum, pulsed like one massive heartbeat, and a shockwave of fire exploded from my chest in a brutal arc of light, disintegrating them all. I collapsed face down in the grass. Glenn was at my side immediately, turning me over to face him. I could see him dimly. My ears were ringing. I was fading. I'd used up all the energy I had and was passing out. Nanu came and licked my face with his sandpaper tongue. My head felt skewered from temple to temple. "Carry her. We must reach safety," he commanded, trotting off in the direction of the Watcher of the Eastern Lands. Glenn's worried face was the last thing I saw before darkness overtook me. It was like a dream, but I knew it wasn't. I had been thrown out of my body, which Glenn was carrying over his shoulders like a sack of wheat. The others surrounded us, protecting us from any further attack. I wondered why I had left myself and remembered the battle with the fairies. I saw them then, littering the ground with their oozing filth. At least 1,000 of them lay dead on the field. Not knowing why I had done it, but not willing to waste an opportunity, I willed my astral self to go to the castle of Rune. I wanted to see if I could find anything out to make use of this annoyance. I was there in the blink of an eye, in the courtyard of the fairy stronghold. I focused my attention on finding the ones in charge, and immediately I was in a large room filled with shadow bodies. One stood above the rest on a little platform in the midst of the others, wearing the meat suit of one of the Greys. The sides of the platform were tiled with giant slabs of stone, filled with writing in a language that looked like sticks lined up in rows. One of the slabs was badly broken. A large chunk of the stone was missing. The crowd was full of the fairies, semi-solid three-dimensional shadows who were immensely agitated, clawing pleadingly at the one in the middle. He spoke, and my blood, if an astral body had blood, froze in my veins. "Silence!" I heard the voice of my old handler, Christopher Lords, emit from the dark mouth of the leader. It was the same voice that had spoken when Glenn had been stabbed to death by the dead spring, I now realized. The room hushed gradually like a hive of angry bees smothered in smoke. "She has defeated the hunters," he said, and the room began to rumble with panicked voices. "Silence!" he yelled again. "You said she could not defeat so many," one called out from the faceless mob. "You said you knew her. You claimed you knew how to defeat her. But she is strong," another screamed. "Shut up," Chris said. He looked at the ceiling and raised his long, thin arms wide. "Master, show yourself. Prove to them that you are with us." A dark smoke swirled out of the damp ceiling just above the platform. It coalesced, and a pair of large red eyes stared down on the gathered fairies. "You called?" it asked, with a voice so evil it dripped like oil. My head began to hurt even worse. "Your subjects doubt me. I need your help," Chris said, dropping to his knees and putting his head to the floor in reverence. "She has defeated the hunting party?" the warlord asked. "Yes, master." A foul, angry roar rained down like acid on the group, and the fairies lifted their arms as if to block a physical blow. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "What can we do now?" Chris asked. "We must destroy her, kill her elf, find a way. Send the traitor to murder him in his sleep." The demonic voice simpered. "Where is Anvin?" Chris yelled. "Here he is, son of lords," one of the shadows answered from beside a doorway in the back of the room. It led something that appeared to be invisible but was heavily bound in golden chains. I could see the swirl of wind within the bonds and knew it was the traitor. "My lord," he said, with the sound of wind and trees as a voice. "Take form," Chris commanded. The wind sprite materialized, clothes of gray wrapping around him as he did. He was tall, but slightly rounder than the other eastern creatures I'd seen. Gloomy, with gray hair and eyes that were limp and downcast. He said, "Your will, master." "Glen Ellenbill must die. You will kill him tonight," Chris said. "My lord, I cannot. He knows me." Chris struck him hard in the jaw. Anvin fell with a cry of pain. I could tell they'd been hurting him. He'd defected to their side, but they still treated him badly. "You will do it," Chris said darkly. "Look at me," the warlord spoke from his bat-like haunt above. Anvin slowly lifted his face to the ceiling. Obviously, it was painful for him to look. "You will kill him tonight, or you will be a fairy by morning." "Yes, master." "Release him," Chris commanded. The shadow who'd led Anvin forward now unlocked the chains and pulled them away. Anvin crumpled to a heap on the floor, his arms shakily keeping him from smacking face down onto the stones. Chris looked down at him and said, "Go." Anvin rushed past me in a breeze, set on his way to find my husband and murder him. I could see the warlord, could reach him. If only I could kill him now and be done with it. Chris looked up at the evil spirit and asked, "What if he fails?" "Then I will take care of it myself," the mist answered. I'd seen enough. I willed myself back into my body. I was upside down, bumping Glenn's lower back as he walked. My head and hands felt swollen, all the blood having rushed into them. I tapped him on the bottom, and he stopped. "Put me down," I demanded. He set me gently on my feet. My legs had gone numb and pins and needles prickled me all over. The others gathered around, inquisitive. Patos spoke. "Was it another memory?" "No, I had an out-of-body experience." "Really?" Glenn asked. "Yep, I saw what was being planned for us. The traitor, the wind sprite that turned on us, his name is Anvin. He's coming to try and kill you tonight," I said to Glenn. The pain in my head didn't relent. It was becoming a full-on migraine. Boreas gasped and said, "Anvin? I have fought by his side for the past 20 ages. Are you sure it was him?" "Is he gray and gloomy?" I asked in response. Aura put her hands on her husband's shoulders as his head hung in sorrow. "Oh, Anvin," he said softly. "Well, he's coming to kill Glenn, so we'd better get to Ambius and find out what we're going to do about this," I said, walking forward despite the painful tingling and the stabs in my skull. The others lagged behind for a moment before catching up with me. Nenu was walking beside me, his tail curling lazily in the air. Glenn took his place at my other side, resting his hand on my back. I felt the warmth of him, even through my cloak. It was impossible to imagine him going cold forever, never feeling his heat or hearing his heart beat again. I couldn't even guess what life would be like if I never saw his blinding smile or smelled the woodsy scent of him for the rest of my life. I turned into him, burying my face and holding him tightly. I pressed my ear to his chest, letting the heartbeat reassure me. He was startled, but wrapped his arms around me and smoothed my hair. "We'll stop him, Alana. I'm not going anywhere." I breathed him in, taking in all the things I'd just imagined losing. My eyes were dry, but I felt like crying. They kept trying to take him from me. "I will die before I let harm come to Glenn," Boreas said, saluting with his hand up and his thumb tucked. "So will we," Peta said, patting my shoulder. Marlowe and Aura nodded behind her. "That's what I'm afraid of." "Perhaps, before we all curl up and die, we should finish the journey and have some dinner?" Nanu put in. I laughed sincerely then, letting go of Glenn, but not before stealing a kiss. "Yep, Nanu, I think you're right. It's time we got to safety. Let's go." We walked quicker then, double time. Soon we saw the smoke curling from the crooked chimney of Ambius's house. A pang of remorse went through me at the knowledge that Gable would not be here. Another pang, a real pain, stabbed through my skull from brow to brainstem. I hoped I could make it. I wouldn't last much longer. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter's released.